recycled aggregate. There is a different cement types. There's a type 1L, which is combines your traditional Portland cement with limestone, which again, the whole goal behind all of these strategies is to reduce the amount of cement in a mix. There's also technologies that get into the actual sequestration of carbon or injecting carbon into the mixes that can replace some of that cement content. The thing with concrete is that it is a hyper-local material that is sourced. Contrasting with maybe steel, in a project you can go and source your rebar from anywhere in the U.S. and kind of find that right provider that can offer you a low carbon product. When it comes to concrete, you're really subject to within a radius of your project site, and it's a rapidly evolving landscape where policy is the main driver behind what we're seeing across the U.S. There's also market conditions that may vary and impact ready-mix suppliers in different ways. That those can be in the way of shortages of those SCM materials that I mentioned, and also just ideas or people and organizations that are really driving towards performance-based specifications where innovation and more innovative concrete mixes can be focused. Speaking on that kind of hyper-local situation here in Colorado, we're kind of somewhere in the middle of that scale in terms of market maturity in having those environmental product declarations from the suppliers in the area. And they're I think we're also somewhere in the middle when it comes to performance and carbon intensity. This is kind of a heat map developed by an architecture firm, kind of highlighting across the US where we're seeing the availability of these low carbon mixes and how they compare to the benchmarks in those areas. So, you might see some areas that are performing worse than others here, but it might also have to do with the benchmarks that those jurisdictions have set in terms of what reductions should be targeted and how this map is measuring, high or low carbon intensity. I wanted to showcase an example of a project I worked on here in Denver, where we were reviewing the ready-mix suppliers' options and mix designs that they're proposing for the project. And we found that even without, before we got engaged in the conversation of pushing this forward, the ready-mix supplier was already kind of by their common practice or by their internal guidelines already providing mixes that were meeting or exceeding all of the baseline targets, landing somewhere more in the middle, and really in some cases approaching those kind of best in class or top 20th percentile performing products. Again, when you're doing these comparisons of your low carbon concrete versus what's traditionally available, we're referring to data from NRMCA that specifically looks at regions separately across the US. And again, I mentioned earlier that it's really a policy-driven change that we're seeing. We're seeing policies here in Denver or California like the Buy Clean Acts, where this is going to be a requirement for this project in the near future if it isn't already a policy that is in place, where people who are working with these carbon intensive materials like concrete are required to be disclosing these emissions, maybe even meeting some thresholds or targets that have been set. And I think that's what really is key for something like the Sidewalks initiative to focus on, is on, and I have somewhat of an understanding, and I'll let Adam chime in more specifically about what has maybe already been discussed with the group or with the city, but it's recommendations that are already in place at different scales of policy across the country and even locally in Colorado, where I think it's really a low-hanging fruit to be requiring these EPDs, establishing these limits of carbon that cannot be exceeding, to really push for sustainable. I think we all want the sidewalks. I think it's a huge gap and opportunity in the city of Denver and beyond, but it's a matter of these need to be built. Let's build them in a way that aligns with how the industry is trying to address our responsibility in climate action. There's also, making sure that whatever is pushed forward aligns and overlaps with these policies that might be enacted at the state or, maybe more local level or city level, and an opportunity to encourage, partners to explore innovative materials. A colleague of mine was recently looking at these curbs barriers that are manufactured by almost entirely waste products or recycled materials. So I think, especially in the sidewalks, there's an opportunity that one of the barriers we see when talking about this at the building scale is whether the columns or the walls or the slabs need have specific criteria for early strength or for very let's say heavy loading conditions. I think we have an opportunity in applications like the sidewalks to have greater flexibility in how these, you know, concrete products are put together and how they can meet sustainability goals. Adam, do you want to add anything, maybe context that I don't have before I open it up for more questions or summarize what I've said?
Yeah, just one thing, and I know Keith has been working with the mayor's sustainability advisory committee a little on this topic, and I know that the city and county has put out a paper or a report on embodied carbon. It was very entry level, and we did actually not speak to, but we've traded emails with Dottie, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and they are also just really scratching the surface of figuring out this topic and how to address it in all of the building projects that they're doing. They do use a lot of concrete, asphalt, other materials, and I think it'd be really great for them to integrate the concept of embodied carbon and lowering the embodied carbon in their projects. So we'll keep plugging away at the city and county to introduce something like that, and possibly even give them this kind of presentation if they want it, and hopefully we'll start to see this implemented on local projects.
And I saw in the documents that either are kind of working documents, I should say, or being prepared as part of supporting this initiative, references to the city of Portland policy and how they've approached it. I think that's a great resource if you haven't already taken a look at that. And one of the big takeaways from their studies is that they were able to really achieve reductions in the 30% range that were no cost premiums to the city. They actually, in some cases, even representing some cost savings. And I think the Denver market is in a good position in terms of maturity and the suppliers in the area being aware of what they need to do with their concrete mixes to meet these goals and report those emissions. And I think it obviously comes down to scale too. I think, City of Portland is a good reference for that, where they have different requirements depending on what is that volume of concrete that we are pouring, or that this maybe a specific sidewalk project is in terms of cubic yards or whatever, and setting different goals, understanding that there it might be harder or easier to meet them depending on the quantity of material that's being procured. So just before I move into the questions part, just want to kind of the takeaways are, I think it's inevitable and, it's great. Concrete's going to be, that main material for the construction of sidewalks that we're all hoping to see. It's a durable product. It's just a matter of just paying attention to what's going into those mixes. Can we put some language together that kind of guides those trade partners to align with these sustainability goals and take advantage of what's already being enacted at the federal, state, or even local level to kind of integrate into those policies that are already in place? And I know you folks have several other things in the agenda, but I'll stick around for a few minutes if folks have questions on what I've covered or anything that wasn't clear.
There are some questions in the chat. Keith wanted to know where asphalt is on that pyramid that you showed earlier on.
No, off the top of my head, if I'm completely honest.
I mean, you could maybe just answer it.
I,
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge question. The more I've talked to Dottie about some of this, some of the people on the advisory board, they just talk about how much asphalt Dottie is putting down by comparison to concrete. The asphalt is really a huge part of their budget. So that's why I was just curious.
I don't see it in this pyramid. I think it was more, the source of this graphic is more tailored for like vertical built environment. But I would put it somewhere there around that middle tier with concrete, just at least judging from some of the other kind of similar raw materials that I'm seeing around here. Somewhere in the maybe not the top, but middle to second tier. I think
Nice.
that's also a great opportunity that unfortunately has a bigger data gap than concrete in terms of aligning with industries that have set benchmarks or that have that information that's being reported out. We don't often come across with suppliers that have those environmental product declarations for materials like asphalt. I think concrete might be that, let's call it lower hanging fruit that is we're ready to tackle now based on how the market is currently evolving. But I'm sure asphalt is for sure to follow suit soon after that in terms of availability of these materials.
And then Jeff had a question about maintaining the old stone sidewalks. Is it too hard to level them? And that might be really a question about existing structures and embodied carbon in existing structures. And if
I can answer from an embodied carbon standpoint. I wouldn't be able to tell you if it's hard or not hard to level them or kind of about retaining them. When it comes to sustainability in building things, at least in when it comes to embodied carbon, the most sustainable or the greenest alternative is going to be what has already been built. So if there's ever an opportunity to reuse an existing building or reuse an existing sidewalk, that's always going to be the more sustainable option. You know, again, what embodied carbon measures are those emissions from like extracting those raw materials, getting them through the manufacturing process, getting them through site, any replacement cycle. So if those emissions have already kind of happened and you're able to repurpose and find a way to retain those materials, that's always going to be the leading sustainability action. I know that's not always going to be the possibility, whether depending on deterioration or the condition at different places, or things like requiring soil remediation or additional support, but that's always going to be, you know, the preferred alternative.
Great, thanks, Andres. I think I'm gonna turn it over to Mac if you're good, and it seems like everybody is good.
I just wanted to clarify something, Adam.
Yeah, go for it.
If Jeff was actually referring to flagstone sidewalks versus the concrete sidewalks.
Yeah, it's you know, I live in an older part of town, and we have these big salmon-colored stones that are 4x4, and in some places they're in good shape. And I can see the city just deciding to just tear all that up because that's the easy thing to do.
Well, it also might be an accessibility thing, Jeff, but I don't think that anything that Andre said wouldn't apply to that as well. It's the same conversation.
Reuse is what I'll always say. But if we can't, then all the other things I said.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks, Andreas. Appreciate that primer on embodied carbon, and I'm going to pass it over to Mac to kind of change the subject a bit. Hang out if you want.
I unfortunately have to run to another event, but if anyone ever has additional questions or wants to bug me about anything I talked to about today, Adam has my contact info and can pass it along.
Andres, great presentation too. If you can share the slides and your contact info, I'd love to share those back to our team as well. I think folks,
Yeah.
are always interested in that, and that would be a good connection.
Perfect. I'm seeing Adam
Adam-
tomorrow, so I'll coordinate that knowledge transfer.
Would you
Really-
mind,
really
Adam, if I shared this recommendation before Andreas has to jump off? Especially because I gotta go too.
What recommendation?
The embodied carbon recommendation that the Sustainable Advisory Council is gonna.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, let me just share my screen real quick.
Not feeling great.
Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of, and Andreas, I'd love to touch base with you more about this. But this is what we've been working on at the Sustainable Advisory Council in the Energy Committee, and it passed out of the Energy Committee, and we're gonna take it to the full Sustainable Advisory Council as a recommendation for Dottie, at least recording and and potentially including embodied carbon standards on products going forward. I did just want to highlight a couple of things. There's about 2,300 miles of sidewalk in Denver, with about 300 miles that need to get either replaced or are missing, or about there's about 1,000 miles that are potentially too narrow. So there's going to be a lot of work done over the next decade on sidewalks. And then the recommendations that we have really come up with, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on this, if not now, later, is just, first of all, Dottie recording this, and the embodied carbon that they're emitting by putting all these sidewalks in every year. And then, obviously trying to work into doing more of this, get environmental product declarations and whatnot incorporated into their kind of scheme. And, Mac, I'd be curious, the only example that we've heard of so far from our committee of embodied carbon, any kind of reporting on that is from the buildings team at CASR. And I don't know if there's any other standards that are being used for embodied carbon in Denver at this point. Do you know the answer to that?
I read some of the City of Denver reports on embodied carbon, and I saw the same thing you're seeing, Keith, about a lot of data around the different building typologies and how that's being, the emissions associated with those more vertical developments. I did not find anything or any requirements specifically related to infrastructure, roadway, or sidewalks. I think, at least with a quick look at what you're showing now on the screen, I think that's a great place to start. I also see a lot of overlap with that City of Portland one, and it might have been the inspiration behind some of this text.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think I almost feel like I want to say that like the EPDs should be like a non-negotiable, but I'm also never working at the scale of like maybe, that's a lot of miles of sidewalk. I just don't know how many of those are going to be happening, let's say in one project. So I'm hesitant about like setting too strict of requirements just based on like the smaller projects. And that if you look back at that City of Portland one, they do have that kind of split requirement depending on, I think that it read something like they have a list of suppliers that have pre-approved mixes, or the project team can provide a project specific EPD and mix design when it goes over X cubic yards. So I think I'm not too familiar with the horizontal infrastructure side of things, and especially with the scale of how maybe it's a bunch of little projects happening over the next decade or so. That would be my only thing of maybe recommending an approach that sets different, either like some mandatory or like across the board requirements, and then maybe other things that align with a little bit with scale. Just thinking that it might be more of a smaller local supplier who would provide those smaller projects, and maybe they just haven't had the exposure to refining their mix designs or even getting EPDs generated. Because there is a cost associated with getting like a verified EPD generated. That would be my only like additional thought, but I'm happy to take this a deeper look into this.
Yeah, that'd be great. And are there local suppliers then that it sounds like you're saying there was one that you've run across. Are there others that meet these kind of requirements?
I think all your big players are gonna have options that meet these requirements. You know,
Mhm.
Martin Marietta, Cemex, Holcim. I just don't know if, you know, the general contractor in charge of the Sidewalks project is sourcing from those big players, or they have, you know, other trade partners that might be smaller in scale who just haven't had that exposure. So I think the market is there for sure, at least at the larger scale or the building scale. That's my only something I haven't explored yet is if it's across the board or if it's, you know, those big names in the concrete industry that are kind of leading that way and it isn't necessarily trickling down to the smaller players.
Okay.
I
Keith,
don't know
That's
if I'm
great.
using the right
Thanks.
words with larger, smaller, but I think you got the point.
Yeah, and I mean, we definitely, just from seeing it kind of in my neighborhood, it's definitely a bunch of small contractors, you know, several different companies that are coming in to do this. So I think it, you know, there's kind of a different probably effort that needs to be made. So thanks a lot, and I'll reach out.
Keith, the concrete, the Martin Marietta concrete plant is like probably 3 miles from your house, just so you know.
Yeah, I know there's a few around here. I didn't realize that one was right in town.
Yeah.
And it even varies, like they might have their whatever mix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from their whatever Superior plant and the other one in Arvada, and those can have different EPDs because each plant is, you know, has that different emission profile, and that's part of what goes into calculating those. So we even see to that level of granularity some differences there.
Great. Awesome. Thanks for coming tonight.
Yeah, appreciate it. Sorry I have to rush off, but Adam, if folks have more questions, you know how to reach me, and I'll see you.
Maybe we'll have a part 2. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Good to see everyone. Good to meet you all.
Mac, it's your show.
Yeah, thank you, Andres. Thank you, Adam. I'm Mac Prather. I work for the Climate Action Office in Denver and work on residential programs for energy efficiency and electrification. And Adam asked, and you know, you all asked for kind of an overview of what that means to the homeowner in Denver. Also look at solar energy. And so I pulled some information from a colleague that works on solar as well. I do have some slides. I will share them with you if I can figure that out. Give me just a second. You all see this? Great. And we have a small group, so I'm open to questions as we go along. Of course, this is really meant to be a cursory overview. So I talk about this information to homeowners often. It's really geared to those folks. So there's a little bit of definition and, you know, what do I mean when I say electrification, and why is that important to us here in Denver? Why is it important to climate and the environment? But there's also some resources in here that are things hopefully you all can use. Hopefully you could share out to your neighbors and your community as well. It's a lot of incentives and programs, not only some at Denver's level, but at the state level, at the federal level now. There's a lot. So this is what we'll cover today. And of course, you can always find this information on our website or on our newsletter. So I start with, you know, what is electrification? That's a word that I think for a lot of people sounds a little bit scary. It's unclear. I think probably folks in this room, just based on the last conversation, have a really good understanding of this. But when I talk about it relevant to the home, it's just the process of shifting the use of fossil gas to all electric sources. So getting rid of that old wheezy gas furnace and starting to shift over to using a heat pump for some or all of your heating, and shifting from that gas water heater to a heat pump water heater that's highly efficient. That's what we mean when we say electrification. The good news is that there is technology that's out there on the market that's available that can help us transition away from the use of fossil gas for heating and for producing hot water for our home. There's other technology on this slide, battery storage, even e-bikes. When we talk about electrification broadly, we're talking about, reducing the use of fossil fuels. And so all these things are relevant tools to help us accomplish that. So before I go on to, I just want to talk about the heat pump. I don't know your all's technical background, how much you know about heat pumps. Sometimes I go into a conversation and the term heat pump means nothing to folks. Sometimes I go in and folks have a really good understanding. So, sometimes I'll say to a group, a heat pump is really just like your air conditioner. It's usually going to be more efficient, and it can also heat your house. And to some groups, I will say there's a magical fairy in a box that pulls hot air from outside and puts it inside your house. I have a coworker that says that, and that seems to resonate with people. But I'm just curious, what's the familiarity of this group? Are there questions on the technology? We know what it is. I see thumbs up. Yeah, I thought that was the case. Does anybody have a heat pump in their home already? Awesome. That's great. So you are advanced. I'll whiz through this then. We love the heat pump because it's very efficient, both at cooling and at heating. And there is technology on the market right now that can heat a home in Denver's climate, even on those coldest days, even on those days last winter when it was very cold in a well-insulated house. That heat pump is going to keep up just fine. We do have some information on our website, so this is a great resource to share for folks. Just basic definitions. We know what is a heat pump, what are the different kinds of systems that you might look at for your home. So I'm always pointing people to that information. And why does it matter here in Denver? We know that about 2/3 of the emissions within City and County of Denver are from buildings and homes. So that's the group I work with in the Climate Action Office. And you'll see on the left here, about 15% of that share comes from the small residential homes, single family, duplex, and so forth. And so to meet some of those goals that Denver has established to, reduce emissions, to achieve net zero buildings and homes, a fair share of those emissions are left up to the choice of the homeowner and the replacement of that equipment over the next several years. So every furnace, every water heater that gets replaced, it's very important that we take that opportunity to transition those as much as we can. And the air conditioner. So I didn't mention that, but I think it's really critical. And I'll make this point to you all because you'll understand the transition of air conditioners to heat pumps, I think, is also really critical in this transition. Any heat pump can reduce the use of fossil fuel. And so instead of putting in traditional air conditioners, we can make good progress just by installing heat pumps instead. It also makes a big impact in terms of the climate impact because the grid, carbon intensity of the grid is decreasing. And so I think you all know this as well, but we're lucky to be in a place where there are goals and requirements of Xcel Energy to reduce that carbon intensity of the electricity they generate. So the more we can use that electricity to heat our homes and heat our hot water, heat our buildings, the more we're able to utilize those renewable energy resources. So it really does. I get that question a lot. Does it, if we put in a heat pump, does it just shift the fossil fuel somewhere else? Well, this is the reason that in Denver, it doesn't do that. And we know there's also impact in the home. So there's been a lot of news coverage, stories, research, scientific research, academic research in the past year, in the past several years, particularly around gas stoves and gas cooking, that shows that there really is a health impact of that. Theoretically, your furnace and your furnace is vented to the outside, as is your water heater. But we also know that in a lot of older homes in Denver, particularly in homes of lower income families, folks maybe without as many resources to kind of to work on the deferred maintenance in the home, there are issues with pollution and health and exposure to things like carbon monoxide because of that gas-powered equipment. So I'll pause and I'll ask, are there any questions? That's kind of the background and the why. I went through that pretty quick, but I'm going to kind of transition into the actionable part of the presentation. So I'll pause for a couple questions if there are any. All right, then I will keep on going. Thank you all. So we want to talk about this to homeowners in terms of making a plan. We know kind of the status quo in individual homes and in bigger buildings, commercial buildings, multifamily buildings, really is that when a piece of equipment breaks, that's when you start to think about it. And I think, folks know that from experience in their own home too. Usually you don't think about your old air conditioner until it stops working or it stops working well. And so, we can't imagine a future where everyone's homes are heated by heat pumps. But until that future, we really do need to start getting homeowners to think and plan for this replacement, especially because there's so many incentives and programs out there. We want people to start thinking about this as a big purchase, making a plan, and putting that together so that they can take advantage of the incentives and the programs that are out there. So I tell people, if your furnace, if your air conditioner, if your hot water heater are 10 or more years old, it's time to start putting that plan together. I think Andres would probably have good input here about the embodied carbon piece of this, with the age of the equipment, but ASHRAE and other sources say that the average useful life of this type of residential equipment is about 15 years. Some people have a furnace that lasts for much longer than that. So there is a bell curve of the life of the equipment, but the average is around 15 years. So if you're getting close to that, if you're 10 or more, it's time to just start thinking about that plan. Are you going to be in the home? When are you going to be ready to make that replacement? If you want to add air conditioning to the home, maybe you had a window air conditioner that's very inefficient. Those are pretty expensive to run, or you have a swamp cooler that's working, but you're not quite pleased with that performance on those hottest days. Then it's time to start thinking about a heat pump. That's really what we want to push people to do when they're adding cooling to the home. And then third, we also want to encourage folks to think about the building envelope first. As part of that plan, really it should be, are there opportunities to bring up the level of my home for the attic insulation? Are the walls insulated? Can I do air sealing? Those are things that we should be thinking about before we add the heat pump or before we upgrade, so that we can size down equipment, we can save money. And I always try and drive to some really actionable items for homeowners. Really adding insulation to your attic and to your home is one of the biggest steps you can take to have an impact in your, the emissions, the climate impact of your personal life. And it's relatively easy. So the first step I always say is, please go get a home energy audit. Excel Energy has an incentive for that. And so it ends up being at most about $200. Someone walks through your home with an infrared camera, and they will give you a prioritized list of all of the kind of action items, the next steps you can do to improve the comfort and the efficiency of your home and save money. And Xcel Energy also has folks who will help interpret that report for you. So always encouraging people to call and get connected with their energy advisor. That's somebody who will help you navigate the utility rebates, but also help you prioritize the steps from that energy audit. That's really important because the sequencing of this matters to the utility, to Xcel. There are some programs that require you to enroll in that energy audit first. And if you do it in that order, you can unlock some bonus incentives with the utility. So it's a good educational tool, but it's also important to the sequencing of using those utility rebates to their maximum potential. And again, the third point, just iterating. Think about those opportunities to insulate before you upgrade the equipment or before you add new equipment. That can save money in the long term. And I struggle with this slide because the text keeps getting smaller because we keep getting new information. But the landscape for rebates and incentives for home energy, home upgrades, and heat pumps out there, it's a lot to navigate right now as the homeowner. So I'm happy to talk about any of these if folks have specific questions. Denver does have some rebates. Xcel Energy, again, has rebates through your utility for heat pumps and for insulation, for a number of other upgrades for your home. State now has tax incentives, and there are federal tax incentives. We're hoping to see soon some federal rebates through the Inflation Reduction Act. Waiting on a little bit more information on that. And it's a lot to navigate, but we do have some information on Denver's website. We always direct people to denvergov.org/heat pump rebates. And we do have some information to help work with your contractor at denvergov.org/home energy. So there, there's some sample questions you can ask your contractor. We always recommend folks go out to 3 contractors at least and get some comparison as they're working and planning on these projects. It's important to have somebody that you trust to work in your home and comparison for those different quotes, so you're sure you're getting a fair deal. A little bit of detail here on Denver's heat pump and home energy rebates. This is just a sample of what's available right now. Heat pumps for heating and cooling your home, heat pump water heaters, as well as rooftop solar, battery storage, and EV charger wiring. So of course, to access these, you need to be in the city and county of Denver. You need to be in a small residential building. It's really for a single family duplex and buildings that are townhome, and you have to be an Xcel Energy customer. Again, we want to push people to use the Xcel Energy rebates as well. These rebates are offered through your installer. So really, as the homeowner, you just need to have a plan together. You need to solicit, again, those 3 quotes. That's what we recommend, and confirm that folks are enrolled in the program and that your contractor has pre-approval for your rebate. That process, the paperwork, is then handled by the contractor. Already saw those. And I'll talk a little bit about solar as well. These are from my colleague who really focuses on our solar programs. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have them. I'll do my best to answer them, but can always forward them on to Lee as well. This, I think, is probably clear to you all, but this is some educational information on net metering. Essentially showing that when you install solar panels on the home, you can utilize that energy as well as send back some excess generation to the grid. We also offer some education about what homes are suitable for solar. Looking for places that have a good roof orientation to the southern sun, are not, shaded by a giant maple tree and have significant space there. We often direct people to community solar resources. So this is a good way that you can purchase solar capacity to power your home without actually installing panels on your roof. So essentially off-site solar that you can buy a share in and utilize. You don't utilize the energy directly, but you buy a share of the generation there to help promote that solar installation in your community. This is also a great resource for lower income families. There's a number of solar gardens here in Denver that are dedicated to lower income families. And so if you qualify for those programs, you can actually get those solar garden subscriptions at no cost. And that helps offset the electric bill for folks that are typically 80% or less the area median income. Those programs are offered by Energy Outreach Colorado. Here's a great illustration of that community solar subscription. As the homeowner, again, you're buying the energy. There's a panel offsite somewhere in a large array that's making electricity for the utility. We do have a newer program called Solar Switch Denver, which is essentially a large group buy that's bringing people together to help kind of cooperatively buy a solar installation for a large number of homeowners. And there's a rebate through that program for households that are at 100% or less area median income. It's a pretty significant rebate, up to $8,000 off the cost. And the idea of this program really is to help get a best cost by aggregating the interest, aggregating all the installations, and then going out to bid for a large number of installations. If you don't want to participate in that and you want to just install solar on your roof individually, separately from that program, there is a smaller rebate up to $4,000. And we do require that folks who are interested in that either have a heat pump or a heat pump water heater in the home. So it kind of unlocks the rebate for solar there. On top of that, there's the federal tax credit. So if you have installed solar in the past year, you're eligible for pretty significant tax credit up to 30%. If you're working on any of these projects or you know anyone working on them, I'm always telling people to talk to your tax person, save all of your receipts, save all of your documentation. We have to, kind of say we're not able to give that tax advice, unfortunately, but we want people to know that those credits and those incentives are out there. And then finally, there's some good opportunities for financing. So one that we want everyone to know about is the Renew program through the Colorado Clean Energy Fund. Those solar installations can be a large dollar amount, and you can be eligible for financing through this program at a relatively affordable rate. You can also finance a number of other measures shown on the page here, including heat pumps. So if you decide to do all that in your home at one time, that Renew program is a great resource. And those are all my slides. Again, Adam, I'm happy to share those with you. I'd love for folks to kind of promote those resources to your neighbors and community, and would be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, that's great, Mac. And I also put a lot of the links that you put into the chat so people can access them a little easier.
Appreciate it.
Anybody have questions? Feel free to unmute yourselves. We're a pretty small group.
Yeah, Mac, this is Dean. I've got a question. It's kind of anecdotal, I suppose, but is there like a list of, this goes to both solar and heat pumps, I suppose, but a list of contractors that you could that are out there that are fluent in that? Because I had a problem about 4 years ago where I lost a furnace. It was late December. I didn't have a lot of time to make a decision, and the vendors I all talked to, almost none of them were fluent in heat pumps at all. And I finally just gave up and just got something that'll get me by for a while. But it's really hard to find, I feel like somebody, this is, like I said, 4 years ago, maybe that's changed now. But it seems like you can't really you're not really going to get a good story from a lot of people that are trying to make money on furnaces to put in heat pumps.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So unfortunately, we don't recommend one installer over another because we're
Sure.
Denver. There are some good resources out there. I know Love Electric is one that talks about kind of the process of buying a heat pump, and they offer some good questions that you can talk to an installer about. As a consumer, like kind of how do you educate yourself? What questions are good to ask for contractors? Denver has some of those resources as well on our website. But yeah, it is a great question. There's also a need for more upskilling, training of contractors, and so we do have folks focused on the green workforce as well. They're scaling that up.
Well, and sorry to jump in or stay on this, but to follow up a little on that, or on the solar part, I already have some solar, but if I wanted to add to it, would I still be able to use some of those credits or to add to that? And that's a whole nother thing. Is it seems like if you get a different vendor, you might have to get additional equipment, or I don't know if it's a different inverter or another controller or something like that. It just seems like you can't get a straight answer there either.
That's a great question. I know it's usually possible to add to a system. So if you have a system and have the space,
Yeah.
I would have to ask my colleague who's more on the solar side about the details and then about the incentives that are out there. Not sure on the tax credits, but we can always pass that question along as well.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Dean, I'm dropping in a link to Xcel Energy registered contractors.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
For heat pumps.
Oh,
And the folks that are on Xcel Energy's list have, taken some basic training and are part of their trade network. And then, like I said, Love Electric is specific to Colorado. They have some more guidance on their website, and they're kind of a third party. So I think they're a great resource as well.
okay.
There's also, Dean, the heat pump store, which I recently came across. They are in Denver and in Portland, Oregon, and they exclusively install heat pumps.
All right, good to know. Thank you.
John, you want to go? I think you were next, and then we'll get to Keith.
Hey, yeah, I just want to say thanks, Mac, for your time. I think we spoke a while ago, maybe back in June. I live in like a 45-unit condo building. It's large. You've got a central heat system. When we spoke last, you guys basically said there were no heat pump options for us right now, and the hope was more technology would come out. But there were a couple buildings like ours in a pilot program for Energize Denver. Do you know if there's any data about how those buildings performed, or if there's any new heat pumps or any other options for buildings like ours?
Yeah. Thanks, John. I remember talking with you, so good to see you. I don't know the status of those pilots, but I will follow up and I will ask for you. I know they're like kind of longer timescale projects, so I'm not sure if the ones that are similar to your system have completed yet. But I know that the plan is that once they are completed, once there's some energy data and some installation data, that we do want to kind of share the learnings from those. So I'll follow up with that team and see if I can get an update for you. But just in general, Denver is working on some pilots for bigger buildings as well, for commercial and multifamily buildings. This is just for other folks in the room, in an effort to kind of understand what it takes to electrify the more complicated systems, larger boilers being one of those. And John, the presentation really today was on the single family, smaller homes, those systems are relatively generally more straightforward. You can either add a heat pump when you're doing the air conditioner, you can transition when you're doing the furnace, or you can go to kind of a mini split supplemental to an older boiler. But when you have that central boiler in a larger building, it's a more complicated engineered system. So it's a great question, and I will follow up with you, with our team and with you on that one.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, glad to see you.
All right, Keith, you're up. You're still here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mac, for that presentation. We were talking about this at the Sustainable Advisory Council meeting about the possibility of giving Denver to publish an average price for these units. I mean, I'm just relaying this too. I had a heat pump installed last year, and I relayed this to Lee, just that, or I don't think Lee was actually on the call. It was Johnny. But it was a 1-unit heat pump in a bedroom, and we got 3 different contractors, and the price difference was about $6,000 between the 3 different contractors. So I think there's a lot of questions out there still from homeowners about, and I mean, it's great to try to find, 3 different contractors to come in, but if you don't really understand where your, kind of baseline is, on some of these, it's just like, anything else that you get done with your home. A lot of what you're paying for, is marketing programs by these different companies. So it makes it a little bit challenging for homeowners. Is that something you guys have talked about?
Yes, it is. Yeah, and it's a really important question. There are also some groups that are working on tools for homeowners to kind of help navigate all of the rebates and incentives. These are like organizations outside of the city and county of Denver, but they're working on cost estimation based on really big data sets, and they are specifically tailoring it to cities, Denver included. Denver will be one of the first on there, and we're in conversation with them to make sure that their data seems to match, and they have a much bigger data set. So I think that's something that when it's published, which should be very soon, that we're going to promote to folks, and hopefully that'll give people a little more confidence. The other part of that is that it's just really hard to get an apples to apples comparison, because when you have those contractors come in, you'll get 3 or 4 different manufacturers with everybody has a good, better, best, and they might all be different systems. So it gets very complicated very fast. And sometimes I tell people, do 3 contractors, but don't maybe do more than 3, because the more options you get, the more confusing it becomes. So going back to the other question, the workforce components and the upskilling of those contractors to be sure we have really confident options is really important. And then another thing we're looking at is some navigation services. So more than just the education, is there more that we can do, or that we can find, nonprofits or third parties to do to actually help folks look at those quotes, look at the projects, and understand that. And I think that's something that the utility is looking at as well. So hopefully we'll be building more of those offerings to help folks kind of actually look at things apples to apples, and that's really good feedback.
Great, thanks.
Great. Anybody else got a burning question for Mac?
Oh, just that we can get your slide deck.
Yes, and I will send it to Adam.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah, and we can put it up on the website, right, Keith? Or some.
Yeah, we'll get it figured out. We can email it out to the list too.
That'd be great.
Mac, is it on CCD's website somewhere?
The presentation is not, but all the resources are, and that's essentially where those links point. So
Okay.
Adam, I can share with you, and y'all can distribute however you like, or you can just link to the pages I have on there.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Really
Okay,
appreciate it.
awesome. Well, thank you. I know we're a small group, small but mighty. Jeff, did you have one more question?
Can Can you give this presentation to local neighborhood associations?
Sure. Do you
Okay.
have one in mind or?
Yeah, I'm the president of Whittier, so
Okay,
I'd like to invite you at some point, probably after the first of the year,
that would be perfect.
to give a presentation.
That'd be wonderful. I'll be sure Adam has my contact information. And me or somebody else from the team, we'd be happy to do that. That was my hope from meeting with you all, was that we could look at some of those resources and start to make those connections. So thank you for the suggestion. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, I appreciate your time, Mac, and everyone being on tonight. Well, hopefully we'll start to get a critical mass here for the next one in December, on December 14th. If I don't see you all between now and then, hopefully on November 11th, I'll see some of you in person for the delegate meeting with the mayor. And
No,
that's
I
it.
will just, I don't want to interrupt you, Adam, but I will just say that Adam and this committee is helping to sponsor this program on the 11th. So this is going to be a program put on in part by the Climate and Sustainability Committee in INC. So we're really excited about that. And we think there's going to be a pretty good turnout for this event. So we hope to see a lot of you there.
Spread the word. All right, I'll give you all 19 minutes back of your evening. Have fun. Go watch your favorite TV show, and we'll see you next time.